things were tough and hard scrabble. Much gold is for the having, but for many it was out of reach. While some chose legitimate means, others chose desperate measures. You know, in 1847, the population of San Francisco was 456 people. January of 1848, the population had increased to 1,000. And by 1850, the U.S. Census, they reported that 34,776 souls dwelled there. With the population booming, the law just couldn't cope with the individual criminals, much less the gangs that ran rapid, preying on miners bringing gold into the assay office, and the aspiring miners, who had all they owned in their pockets or on their back. The local law was overwhelmed, and most often justice was meted out by willing but unqualified peace officers, or by vigilante action. Meanwhile, in Nevada County, California, where some of the largest gold strikes were, the population also increased dramatically. The gold rush was upon us. With it came violence, robbery, murder, vigilante action, and, of course, those ladies of the night. Just what is it that causes men and women to turn away from a straightforward life to a life of crime? Often, there's just no straightforward answers. You know, Jesse James once said, "All the world loves an outlaw. For some damn reason, they remember them." Well, Jesse James and Tom Bell, they were both soldiers. Jesse was in the Confederate Army, and Thomas was in the Spanish-American War. I don't imagine that they knew any other way of surviving. You know, Thomas J. Hodges, after serving as a surgeon in the Spanish-American War, he unsuccessfully tried his hand at prospecting and gambling during California's gold rush. Well, he went to prison in Angel Island for stealing 5 mules. The name he gave peace officers was Tom Bell. Tom later escaped, and he tried his hand at stagecoach robbery.
Tom Bell was a notorious criminal in the gold country. He had a sophisticated group of outlaws that he worked with, and they were not shy about going to different boarding houses and making sure that they worked with the owners of the boarding houses, and those particular owners of the boarding house would tip them off as to who the wealthy people were. And so when they were going from point A to point B in Nevada County, they would rob them, and they did this time and time again.
He wasn't actually Tom Bell at all. That was the name he gave to the authorities once they arrested him after he was caught stealing 11 mules. That name actually owned to a small-time cattle rustler. Tom Hodges, Dr. Tom Hodges, was actually from back in Tennessee, and he served in the Mexican-American War as a surgeon, and then after about 3 years of service, he decided, like many others at that time, he wanted to move west to make a better life for himself. Of course, that meant he came out and tried his luck at prospecting. And that didn't seem to turn out real well because he didn't stick with it very long. And it was about that time where he tried his hand at stealing mules and was caught. So he went to prison, and while he was in prison, he met a man named Bill Gristy. And kind of like one of those prison movies, he and Gristy come up with this plan to escape. One of them's going to act like they're ill, seriously ill, and the two of them are taken out to get help, and then they escape and run off. Eventually, they hatch this plan. They're going to start robbing people, and so they're knocking some people off here and there, and you know, holding people up. There was a driver toting beer, and he had like $30 on him, and they robbed him, and started to realize that this wasn't a real lucrative deal, these little robberies. So they decided they were going to hatch this plan to rob Wells Fargo stage. And they heard that there was $100,000 worth of gold bullion headed from Camptonville to Marysville on the stage there. And so they put a gang together, and I think a gang of 6 on horseback. As they circled the stagecoach, there was an armed guard on board. So an armed guard fired the first shot, and suddenly there was a whole lot of firing going on. And in the end, one woman was killed. She was the wife of a favorite Marysville barber, Mrs. Tillman, I believe. And she was killed. There were 2 men injured, and one of them, Mr. Dobbins, I believe, he was the armed guard who also was shot. Apparently, as the story goes, at some point, Tom Bell, aka Doc Bell, aka the Outlaw Doc, wrote a letter to the newspaper in Marysville and essentially was taunting the community there, saying, "Catch me if you can." Well, sometime there soon after, they started to catch several members of the gang. And at one point, they caught Gristy, and who eventually gave him up.
It took some really qualified lawmen to track them down, and these qualified lawmen were men who would not care whether or not they wore different disguises. So they would go into these boarding houses, and they would be dressed up as old men who had lots of money, who were en route to give some of the money to their family, to try to ferret out Tom Bell and his gang. And they eventually caught Tom Bell.
By the time the Stockton sheriff got down to find Tom Bell, he was already hung by a posse down there. And he was dead at the age of 31.
They were not going to take Tom Bell in to stand trial. They had been after Tom Bell for some time, so they felt as though they were fortunate to be able to get Tom Bell, and they were going to try him right where he was, and they were going to hang him right where he was, which was not too far outside of Camptonville. For whatever reason, at that time in history, Camptonville had the best hanging trees. If those trees could talk, what they would say. Tom Bell, he's just going to be led off to this tree to be hanged. He asks all of the gentlemen around if they wouldn't mind first if he stopped and wrote a letter. He had befriended one of the women who ran a boarding house and her daughter. She had 2 daughters. And so he wanted to write a letter to this woman and to the little girls. So not only did he ask if he could write this letter, and the lawman acquiesced, but he also had some cigars with him, which he passed out to the lawmen as well. So while they smoked their cigars, he wrote this letter to the woman that ran the boarding house and her daughters, which was to thank her for her loyalty to him and for always helping him, and then wanted to just make sure that she knew to keep her daughters away from outlaws, away from criminals, so they wouldn't have this kind of life that he had had. And with that, after the letter, after he put the last dot on the page, he folded it, handed it off to the sheriff, and then he was executed.
Although it failed, the robbery was the first stagecoach robbery in California, a Wells Fargo stagecoach.
Here I lay me down to sleep, to wait the coming morrow. Perhaps success, perhaps defeat, an everlasting sorrow. That was Black Bart. He is employed by the Reeder Ranch, that was in Nevada City, California. To make ends meet, he robbed the Wells Fargo stagecoach at least 27 times.
Black Bart lived hereabouts. Jumping to the end of this story, after he got out of prison, he went up to a ranch up north of Rough and Ready, and he said, I know I don't really belong here, but I'd like to go up and take a look at the old place where I used to work as a ranch hand when I was robbing stages. Well, he went up there and was gone for quite a while. And when he came back, his saddlebags were pretty darn heavy. And they just figured that he might have stashed some of the gold and nuggets and coin and stuff from Wells Fargo stage holdups.
Charles Bowles, aka Black Bart, was born in England and came to a farm in New York when he was age 2. And then 20 years later, like many other young men, he ventured west in order to discover gold. Arriving in California, he spent some time on the American River mining on gold claims there with his brother and cousin, and both of them met their demise during the prospecting years. Ultimately, people believe that they both died from typhoid fever. So with that, he left California and went back east and joined the Army. And right around that time, the Civil War started. While he was in the Army, he rapidly moved up through the ranks, once again proving his tenacity and that he was a likable gentleman, ultimately being injured in the Battle of Vicksburg. From there, he was discharged from the Army and met his wife and was married, but then decided that family life wasn't really for him, so he headed back out west to Idaho and Montana, where he spent a number of years mining again. And he remained in contact with his wife, Mary Elizabeth, until 1871, indicating that he had some unsettled business and he was upset with Wells Fargo Bank. And after that time, she never heard from him again, and she counted him for dead. Highway robberies began, but nobody linked exactly who Black Bart was until his capture in San Francisco.
Well, I'm Freddie Langdon, and my grandfather told me about Black Bart. And Black Bart is a time when he worked for Jim Reeder at the sawmill here. He went by the name of Mr. Martin. This Mr. Martin worked here a few years. He had a cabin out and back by the sawmill. He was a quiet type of guy. Everywhere he went, he didn't ride a horse. He just walked. I never heard any bad thing about Mr. Martin on the ranch. It was always something good or something interesting. He wasn't a lazy man or nothing like that, but he would just like to, a lot of times, stay off to the cabin by himself in the evening. It was in the wintertime and it was a big storm. Great-grandfather Jim Reeder needed to go to the bank, and he banked in French Corral. And he was short of a little cash to pay his employees. He hated to go because of the storm. Well, this Mr. Martin came up and said, "Jim, I can loan you the money if you would like it, and then you could go do the banking when the storm's over." It was quite a deed in those days to save somebody a ride over the mountain down there to French Corral. They wondered how Mr. Martin had the money to help pay for the payroll. Of course, at that time, they didn't know he was Black Bart robbing stages. One other time, when Frank Reeder, Jim Reeder's son, was a little boy, 10 or something like this, Black Bart took him out on the hill over the South Fork, overlooking Jones's bar, and he sat there for a long time. And then a week or two later, the stage was robbed over, probably Mooney Flat or up in Yuba County. That was another thing. They didn't put two and two together till later years after he was caught.
Black Bart's MO was different than some of the other highway robberies occurring with stagecoaches in the time. He always was only on foot. He didn't ride a horse, which was contrary to the expeditious mode of transportation. Most people that would maybe rob something would want to get away quickly, but not in this case. He would just disappear. He would also act by himself rather than with a gang of people, and call to his friends in the woods that didn't really exist at all and would maybe be sticks in the woods in order to make it appear that he had a gang and that he was more powerful than he really was, which was the more consistent way of doing these strong arm robberies. He only used a shotgun, and there's some question as to whether or not it was even ever loaded. He never fired a shot. He covered his face with a flour sack, and he sometimes would cover his boots as well. He would leave behind oftentimes a note or a poem and sign it Black Bart, and sometimes put a P08 at the end, which if you sound it out is poet. So he had a slight sense of humor and maybe a desire to create a name for himself. He was a gentleman by all standards. He never robbed the driver. He never robbed any of the passengers. He would just go for the strong box and other items of value, whether it was gold or jewelry, but not on the passengers themselves. It does seem that he had some sort of sense of right and wrong, in that Wells Fargo had wronged him, so it was okay to wrong them back, and that was his intention, versus other highway robberies would be any item of value, regardless of the person, who would be stolen. In comparison to today's world, his MO and his character is different than what we very often see today. And specifically, I think it's different than what was the common criminal even in the 1800s. He had a sense about him of not injuring others, of being kind of peaceful about how he went about business, but it was like business to him because of the way he carried out his crimes. He seemed to care about the people, but he had justified the property as okay to steal, as something that he had disassociated that from his sense of right and wrong. In the gold industry, in around the gold rush, much like today, it became corporate based. There was entities that were very good at what they did, and the profits rose to the top, where those individuals who led those companies and those opportunities made the money, and the individuals doing the work maybe made enough to get by but weren't getting rich. When in reality, the fever around the whole thing was come west and get rich, and that didn't work out so well for everybody.
Mr. Martin was at ventriloquist, and he just threw his voice, and he entertained the children in that. Mr. Martin had to be friendly to entertain the kids. A lot of older people don't like to be bothered with children, and the kids got a lot of joy and laughing about it. And that's when he robbed those stages, and they said he put sticks up in the rocks. He threw his voice around so he could holler up and tell a person, you got your gun on him, or something like that, and that helped him rob the stage by himself. I haven't ever seen it in too many articles of Black Bart, but it does put two and two together.
Black Bart actually wanted to get caught. When you look at his notes that he left and some statements, at one point during one of the robberies, it was said that he made the comment of, hurry up and send the hounds, and something to the effect of, it's difficult to be living in these woods like this. So he was kind of becoming impatient with the authorities trying to hunt him down. But at the same time, I think he knew his alternative was prison, which is why when he finally was captured, he admitted to robberies occurring before 1879. They suspect because he believed that he would not be held accountable due to a statute of limitations, which is actually incorrect.
Harry Morris, lawman and otherwise known as the Bloodhound of the West, captured Black Bart, the poet, highwayman. Morris later went on to successfully establish his own private detective agency.
Harry Morris knew that there was a fine line between a lawman and a lawbreaker. To paraphrase, it takes a crook to catch a crook. And a lot of my associates, when I was growing up, we were on the fine edge too. I got hauled down to the local police station down back in the East Coast, and he set me straight, took me home, and told me, don't do it again. He just knew the track he wanted to go on, and he was willing to take chances. I just strongly identify with him. He did what was right at the time that was right, did very innovative ways of catching the bad guys and letting the guys who weren't quite so bad kind of slide a little bit. My own experience, I had 3 kids, 3 boys, and they were on the wrong side of the law, and I kind of took them under my wing and brought them back on the right side of the law, and paid off in the long run. I saved one of their kids' life one time, and his mom, out of gratitude, gave me 17 textbook cases. These are the bad guys, this is what they did, this is where they're going, this is the car they're driving. When she died, one of the boys asked me if I would mind having some of her ashes and bury them up in our place up in Rough and Ready. That was one heck of a reward. This goes back like 45 years. So Harry Morris and I, we had a lot in common. And he's one of my heroes. He's right up there with John Wayne as far as I'm concerned. He came west when he was 14 or so, did a lot of things. He was in shipbuilding and accounting and butchering. Got involved in law enforcement. He was a sheriff at one time, over in Alameda County, I think it was. Made some really good connections there and figured out how things got done up in the upper echelons of our government. And I like Harry's style because he was creative and he was persistent. He didn't give up. He was like a bulldog. He got a hold of you and he wouldn't let you go. Harry Morris studied tracking. He one time tracked a guy, I think it was something like 1,800 miles over 35, 40 days.
Black Bart was captured through some very tenacious police work. The detectives assigned to the case ultimately tracked tens and tens and tens of businesses in San Francisco, laundry businesses, trying to find a specific laundry mark that was on a handkerchief that was left behind.
Harry Morris was quite an accomplished lawman in the Old West, in particular in Northern California. He was instrumental in getting some of the most well-known outlaws. He was able to track Juan Soto into the Los Angeles area and capture him. And he was also Black Bart's arch enemy. So it was only after Harry Morris had been working on the case to capture Black Bart for a long time that he was able to find a lead. And it was indeed Harry Morris who did find the handkerchief with the markings from the laundry that Black Bart used, and then tracked that laundry marking to the particular laundry that Black Bart went to on a constant basis.
But he finally found that laundry, and the laundress identified that as her mark, and it belonged to this gentleman investor, a big-time speculator. Coincidentally, at that very moment that she was describing him, here he comes in, Black Bart, to collect some of his laundry. Harry Morris, he said, you know, you seem like a gentleman about town, and I'm looking at investing in some ranch land for raising cattle. Could you come over to my office so we can discuss this a little bit further? And when he walked into his office, Harry Morris said, "Jigs up," or something like that. And Black Bart said, "Well, gentlemen, you got me."
So Harry Morris was a very accomplished lawman. And it wasn't just those two that he tracked, not Juan Soto and Black Bart, but he tracked many, many criminals to their capture. And he would go after them again and again.
After a while, Harry founded his own detective agency. And he was very successful at that. I think his law enforcement and detective work spanned, I think it was about 55 years. And that's pretty incredible.
Bart Wooster worked for Jim Reeder at the Reeder Ranch for a few years as a bookkeeper. When he left the Reeder Ranch, he went to San Francisco and he worked at a big hotel. Wooster was the one that, when they arrested Black Bart, found to see that he was Mr. Martin that worked at the sawmill for Jim Reeder. So then he wrote a letter back to the ranch, at the Reeder Ranch, and told them, I went and saw Black Bart, who the notorious bandit was no more than Mr. Martin who worked for you at the ranch in the sawmill.
Ultimately, you know, he served time in state prison, and then when he got out, he went back to the Reeder Ranch here locally and quickly asked to go see his old cabin, and maybe he gathered up some some loot that he had stashed there from before.
In the later years, when he came back from prison and came back up to the house and asked to go back out there, it'd have been a real great if my grandfather was here. Of course, they knew from the letter that this was Black Bart. But Frank Reeder's sister couldn't keep him there. He said, I want to just go out to my cabin. She tried to keep him here till Frank showed up, but he didn't, and up the road he went. They always thought maybe that's why he wanted to go back to that cabin out there. He might have had some loot stashed away there, and of course it'd be in gold in order to stay under the ground and that. And that's what I would tell you how I heard the story.
Nobody really knew about the many years between the time he disappeared from Decatur, Illinois, until the time he was captured in San Francisco. How many robberies did he really commit? Did he commit as many as he was charged with? Did he commit other ones with a different MO that he was never charged with, or ones that we never knew about? What happened during that time where he was quiet for 5 years? Was he robbing stagecoaches somewhere else to get by?
There was rumor that Black Bart was back in business after he was let out of prison, and that piqued Harry Morris's interest again, and he started to look for Black Bart, but realized it couldn't have possibly been Black Bart. He quit the search altogether and then went about his business trying to find actual outlaws who were still employed.
Josefa Segovia Loiza, referred to only as Juanita in court documents, was executed by hanging for killing a man who was trying to assault her. Josefa's death highlights the challenges that Latino women faced in the late 19th century.
That was not California when she came into the United States area. She came with her partner. We don't know whether or not she was married, but they were together, and he was a gambler, and they came up and they settled into Downeyville, and their life was quite good there. She wasn't doing any particular career of herself. She was helping her husband. He was a gambler, and she would assist him in whatever ways she needed to. Things were rather good for women, generally. Of course, being in a mining camp, there were not many women, and so she was a particular attraction. Josefa was known to be beautiful and vivacious and intelligent, and she was very small in stature. In describing her, they said, well, she was amply endowed and of very strict proportion, but her temper was unbalanced. So this picture of her shows that she was a rather lively individual.
She helped run a saloon that her boyfriend was also the bartender at. And they spent a lot of time together, and Juanita was very well known in the community. The fact that she was Hispanic wasn't anything that anybody called attention to, because there were a lot of Hispanics in the area. So she just was one of the many people in the Downeyville area.
As the 1800s went along, it became more difficult for the Mexican women to do what they needed to do, be who they needed to be themselves, and benefit from the advantages that the pioneer women had. And it was a very sad time, actually, for the Mexicans. The Mexican-American War happened in 1848, and up to that time, things were pretty copacetic for the Mexicans and the pioneers. The pioneers were just beginning to come out, and there was a higher population of the Mexicans than the Americans at that time, and that seemed to be working. And then when the Mexican-American War was closed with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, things changed after that. For a little while, things were good, but then more and more pioneers moved out into the gold country, and the Mexican folks were less and less, and they suffered from laws and regulations that the pioneers had put in. It was July 4th, 1851, and of course, California had just become a state the year before, and all of the miners were celebrating and imbibing the drinks and were carousing in town.
The entire town is celebrating the 4th of July, the independence of the United States. And they're celebrating with little flags and parties, and there was so much going on. There were barrels of alcohol that lined the streets, so they wouldn't be glutting up the saloons. You could just take a beer stein or a cup or something and just dip it into the barrel and just go about your business. So pretty much everybody in the Downeyville area were sloshed. One of the people that had a lot to drink that particular day was Fred Cannon. Now, Fred Cannon was very well liked in Downeyville. He had a great laugh. He could tell incredible stories. If you had a great saloon, you'd want him to come over because he attracted so many people to him. But he was also kind of a hound, and he was always trying to make a play for Juanita, and she would always spurn his intentions and point to her boyfriend, Jose, who was in charge of the bar. And it didn't really stop Fred from continuing to make a move on Juanita on a constant basis. July 4th flew from the day to the night. Fred Cannon is still wandering around drunk, and he accosts Juanita at her home. He comes banging on Juanita's door, calling her names. And she opens the door and flies out into the street and says, "Why don't you come into my home and call me those names?" Well, of course, he's drunk, and he falls into her half-open door and knocks it off its hinges. Now, the hinges back then were not hinges what we think. They were more of a leather kind of a brace.
Nobody knows exactly what happened in there, but it's assumed that he tried to rape her. Well, she fought him off. He left, but then he came back later on that night to apologize to her, and her husband at that time found out about it, and they were arguing, and she grabbed her Bowie knife out of her blouse and stabbed him in the heart and killed him instantly.
And everybody starts to come around Fred, and they're just outraged that this man had been murdered.
Well, there was no law at that time in Downeyville, and the miners were very, very angry. He was a very popular member of their group, so they decided they'd have a trial right now and hang her. That was the thing you did. Immediately, the next day, they conducted a trial right there in the street. A lawman from San Francisco had come in to help save her and argue in her behalf, and the miners were so angry they just chased him right out.
They have this really quick trial for Juanita that took 8 hours. It was the day after the 4th of July where it was supposed to be everybody was considered equal and everybody was entitled to a fair trial, but that was the least of what Juanita received, was a fair trial. Her attorney even brought up the fact that she was pregnant, and that if they put her in jail or they decided that she needed to be put to death, that they wouldn't just be killing her, they'd be killing her child.
So what they did, they said, well, she's guilty, we're going to hang her. So they built a scaffolding over the Jersey Bridge over Yuba River.
Juanita, though, takes it like a trooper. She is led to the gallows, and she doesn't even want the black hood put over her face.
Well, she was very stoic, and she climbed up there, and she put the rope around her neck and kind of adjusted her hair, and they asked her if she had anything to say, and she said, "You know, if that happened to me again, I'd do the very same thing." And then she threw her hat to a friend down in the group, and she said, "Adios, senores," and she leaped off.
They take her body down and they bury her in the same plot that they have placed Fred Cannon.
A very, very tragic and sad day for California.
Was Joaquin Murrieta an evil desperado or the Robin Hood of the West? Joaquin was a model for the movie Zorro, and historians still today don't agree on his story. Was he a saint, a sinner, or somewhere in between?
The conflicting stories about Joaquin Murrieta are that he was either from Chile, where he is still a folk hero, or that he came from outside of Hermosillo, Mexico, and was from a rural agrarian life like many people then and now in Mexico. He came to California looking for gold. He no doubt brought family with him. Reportedly, it was his wife and some in-laws. Story goes that he was robbed at least once of his gold because he was Mexican. And then things got worse. In the more frightening version of things, he was beaten, left for dead, his brother murdered, and his wife assaulted and then killed. He, at that point in the story, turned to banditry, starting off with horse theft, cattle theft, and working up to being a robber of camps. He hated the Anglos for what they had done, and he would have his revenge. Well, if you're going to go into theft in that era, horse theft was probably the easiest way to make enough money to keep yourself in home and fed. It also, though, was a great way to make as much money as you wanted to. It would be a bit like car theft, but without a license plate. What's more, these cars could actually breed on their own. So if you were able to get a sizable herd, you didn't even need to do it anymore. I suspect that was his goal. Given the violent and very much madhouse state that the state of California was in, it is entirely possible that Joaquin Murrieta did just what he thought was right to survive and to help other people in similar situations. He, at some point, grew to such notoriety that he was one of the 5 or 6 Joaquins that the governor of California put a bounty out on. We know that he was the leader of a gang of men like him. We know that they were good at what they did, but not good enough. Henry Love tracked them down, and the Joaquin's banditry stopped. He claimed to have killed him, but did he? There were stories right from the get-go that Joaquin had a sister that had seen the body and said, "Nope, that is not my brother. No, it's not mi hermano." Other people were asking questions as well, and so the evidence was suppressed or destroyed. It is possible that Joaquin wasn't actually killed, but realized that it was time to stop doing what he's doing and returned to Mexico and lived a long and healthy life. One of my own forebears was reported dead in Arizona after he got done serving time for stagecoach robbery. They just believed him dead because he didn't rob any more stagecoaches. He actually moved to Alaska and became a law-abiding citizen there the rest of his life. It is for that reason that I would not be surprised if Joaquin Murrieta did not actually die and simply decided it was time to go home. He was a folk legend to the poor Latinos of California that desperately needed a hero. And is it any wonder that he became the basis for Zorro? The proper creators of Zorro never hid that they were inspired part by the romanticized legends as written down by one John Rollins Ridge, who lived in Grass Valley. Can you believe it? The creator of all of this lived in Grass Valley. It's entirely possible that he was a Robin Hood. It is entirely possible. Was he one, though? Morality became very strange and gray in the wild times of the Wild West. There were men that were clearly bandits at some point in their life, then ended up becoming law enforcement that went bandit. Morality did not have a very clearly defined line in those times. California was a massive frat house of immorality at the time. It simply was. It was approximately 90–95% male, and their purchases and their values reflect what that would look like. Whatever somebody needed to do to survive was in some senses understandable. Joaquin Murrieta was just a product of that environment, really. He came here not for banditry. Nobody came here looking to be a bandit. They came for the gold. And if he wasn't able to get that, then he probably just did what he thought was right. And had the situation been different, I strongly suspect he would have much rather to have made his money with a gold pan. I think we have to try to be forgiving of everybody that was in California for the gold rush. The combination of gold fever and being deprived of female companionship might as well have driven most of these youths, and yes, most of them were in their late teens or 20s. It might as well have driven them all to madness for the first, say, 5 to 10 years of California's existence. We have to just try and be forgiving of them and maybe of each other. I see no reason why people shouldn't enjoy the wonderful story of Joaquin Murrieta. After all, historians have but 2 records that he even existed. Why not think of him as a folk hero?
When a lady came to Gold Country looking for a husband, sometimes she got more or less than she bargained for.
Eleanor Berry was an educated woman. She did have a profession. She was a teacher, which was a very acceptable profession for women in that era at that time. She was a teacher in Gilroy at the school, headmaster, and after a while, when she was about 23, she wondered, am I going to be one of these old maids? She started worrying about that, picked up a newspaper that was from San Francisco, and there were some personal ads in it, one asking for a mail order bride, and it was penned by a gentleman by the name of Louis Drabelbis. She responded, he responded back. They corresponded for probably 3 months before they finally set a wedding date.
Now, of course, this was back in the gold rush days, so you would know whether or not you wanted to marry this person after 2 letters, because it wasn't as though you were going to be able to pass letters back and forth over a period of years. So after 2 letters, this is it. You had to know this is the person that you wanted to marry. And so she was just so excited.
Eleanor was going to take a train from Gilroy to Colfax, got off the train in Colfax onto a stagecoach, headed to Grass Valley to meet up with her betrothed. On the way to Grass Valley, some bandits approached and ordered everyone out of the stagecoach and announced that they were going to blow it up to get the gold that they knew was in a trunk in the back.
They have flour sacks over their heads and flour sacks on their feet so no one can track them down. And they hold up, they rob everybody. She's very upset about this and just pleads with them.
Eleanor, in a tirade, said, please, please, before you blow it up, my trousseau is in a trunk in the back of the stagecoach. Please get it down. The head bandit said he would. He got up to the back of the stage, took her trunk down, and as he was taking it down, Eleanor happened to notice a large scar in the back of his hand. Everyone got out of the stagecoach. They waited. The bandits blew up the stagecoach, grabbed the gold, and they were off. The stage continued to Grass Valley, and Eleanor found the home where her intended had been renting a space, and she went there. The landlady welcomed her in, told her, this is your room, please be comfortable, have a bath, we'll get you ready for your wedding. The next day was supposed to be the wedding. It was wedding day. Louis Strobelbas did return home. They had a witness, and they had a minister, and they had the marriage certificate ready in the parlor.
She's very excited to go down the aisle, and she does so. She gets dressed and walks down the aisle, and as she's standing at the front of the altar, looking into the man's face that she's going to marry, and they start exchanging vows, it occurs to her, something about this guy's voice sounds very familiar. What is it?
He was a bit older, and she thought, not quite as handsome, and probably wasn't quite as wealthy as he had said he was either. But they went ahead with the nuptials, and after the wedding, they pulled her and Louis aside. They were to sign their certificate of marriage. She noticed that his hand, the back of his hand, had a large scar, the same scar that the bandit who had robbed the stagecoach had. She immediately said, "I refuse to be married to this man. Remove this signature from the certificate." And she immediately packed her bags and returned home to Gilroy. So after the failed marriage, Eleanor returned to Gilroy, a distraught woman, not knowing what her life would hold now.
Ends up in San Francisco, where she does try to commit suicide.
But fortunately, the landlady of the house came in to check on her the next morning and called the doctor, and they were able to revive her.
They give her a mustard solution. I guess she was trying to take some arsenic. She does get rid of everything in her system with this mustard configuration.
Though we really don't know, after that, what was Eleanor's life like? She had been ruined. And on top of that, newspapers in San Francisco had heard about her story, had heard about the stagecoach, the failed marriage, the returning home, the attempt to take her life. It was perfect food for a true tales story, and it was published in the San Francisco newspapers, continuing to humiliate poor Eleanor Berry. What happened to her from then on, nobody really knows.
And here she is now in San Francisco, this woman again who's looking for love. We don't know whether or not she found it, and we sure don't know what happened with the man that she was going to be married.
Harriet Sims, a madam, in Nevada City, California. Well, she was accused and she was tried for the murder of a man found naked in Deer Creek. That was down the trail from her saloon. She was acquitted based on some rather curious circumstantial evidence.
Harriet Sims was a well-known soiled dove in the Nevada City area. Where she came from, it's not really clear. Most prostitutes at that particular time period, they would travel from place to place and they would change their names. Most soiled doves, I mean, that was something that they did from a very early age. Harriet Sims was in her 40s when she was working in the Nevada City area as owner of a house of ill repute.
There's nothing unseemly about women working at a dry goods store, but they didn't have a lot of options when it came to employment. The few women that came to California in those first few years generally did come with a husband or a brother on occasion. And yes, there were jobs like that that were considered to be reputable. Unfortunately, if they're single, most women's options were very limited.
A lot of the women that came west, they came west with their husbands or their brothers or their fathers, and a lot of the times those family members would die en route west. And so they would get out to the gold country and they would be left either widows or orphans. And then what they had to do to make a living, they were very limited.
If they were on their own and they had to make a decent living, probably the best way to earn a living was to be a prostitute.
They could either be laundresses that would follow mining camps They could run boarding houses if they were so lucky. Some of them were teachers, but that was only a 3-month job. And so you'd have to figure out something else to do to supplement your income. So many of them came out here and they ended up being working in houses of ill repute.
Some of them created or became very well-known women who ran businesses. They learned a lot when they were here, and they established businesses for themselves and were very wealthy people in their community and did a lot of beneficial things.
Soiled doves had a lot more rights than any other women. If you were a soiled dove, you could own a house of ill repute. You could own property. You could vote in local elections. Any other woman couldn't do that because they didn't have the rights to do so at that point. So I suppose that it was smart business all the way around because there was a certain amount of independence that women like Harriet Sims had.
For a woman to leave the East Coast and come out here blindly, not knowing what the world is going to be like in these mining camps, took a lot of intestinal fortitude, a lot of guts. I'm not surprised that those women, some of them, created some really amazing lives for themselves. And maybe they began as prostitutes and evolved into business owners and successful wives and mothers.
Harriet Sims was definitely a businesswoman. I mean, she not only owned this brothel and saloon that overlooked Deer Creek. It was right on Broad Street, overlooked Deer Creek. I mean, prime real estate. Not only did she own that, but she also co-owned the dance hall across the street. And so between her house of ill repute and the saloon and the dance hall across the way, I mean, she probably was making a great deal of money.
The Gold Rush men were frequently very lonely for female companionship. I have heard one tale of a man that traveled an entire day to see a woman, and that is not a euphemism. He quite literally traveled an entire day from where he was living and working to a neighboring community where he had heard there was a woman. And when he arrived, he proceeded to sit where he could and stare at her as she went about her daily activities for the rest of the day. She was just doing normal day-to-day things. He simply wanted to see a woman, and it had been so long he was willing to do that.
Harriet Sims was a very smart woman, and she knew exactly how to expand her business. I mean, she was smart in being able to figure out what it is that the miners most wanted. And they were lonely. They wanted to spend time not only with her, but some of the other women that she had working within her home. They also liked to dance. I mean, outside of the saloons, if they were in the mining camps, all they could do was dance with one another. And to be able to determine who was going to be playing the part of the woman and who was going to be playing the part of the men, the miners would wrap kerchiefs around their arms to be able to determine who was doing what. So she really did tap into what it was that the miners were lacking. She had many people that would come visit her on a regular basis. And in addition to having some of the women that worked for her, she had this bartender who was a big bruiser of a guy who was also kind of like the bouncer. So if somebody came in and was causing trouble or wouldn't leave, he would make sure that they were quickly dispatched. So Harriet really counted on this particular gentleman an awful lot. If there were people that she didn't really care for, she would make sure that they were taken care of as well by her bouncer. Now, one of the men that she did like an awful lot, who visited her quite regularly, was a gentleman by the name of Pat Berry. Now, Pat Berry had a claim across Deer Creek on Gold Run, and he would often come to visit Harriet and sometimes spend the night with her, and he enjoyed Harriet's company. Now, he would get back and forth across Deer Creek using a tree that the limbs had been cut off on, and they had laid the tree over the creek. The bridge that they did have was washed away, so the miners constructed this little makeshift bridge. So that's exactly what Pat Barry did. He would cross back and forth on this tree along with the other miners. Pat was very excited one day when he had found this incredible find, and he went into town to cash in his gold, and he bought himself a brand new suit, got himself a wonderful steak dinner, and then went over to spend the evening with Harriet. Now, him going into Harriet's place was the last time anybody saw Pat Barry alive. I mean, it was days and days before anybody even saw Pat Barry. And when they did find him, he was completely naked in the eddy of Deer Creek, and he had this discolored kind of goose egg on his head. The authorities that came in, they determined that that particular injury took place while he was still alive. They immediately backtracked where he was, found out the last place he was at Harriet's, went in and looked around, and they saw this weight that Harriet had on her counter, which I'm sure was to, if she was getting paid in gold, wanted to make sure that that gold was actually correct. They determined that he had been hit in the head with this weight, and then his body dumped in Deer Creek. They arrested not only Harriet, but also her bodyguard, her bartender there, and they put her in jail. Now Harriet is sobbing and weeping and saying, you know, I didn't have anything to do with this. I didn't kill him. I enjoyed his company. There isn't any way that I would have done this. Prosecution had made what they thought was a very, very good case against her. While she's in jail awaiting trial, another miner is found completely naked, and he too has this abrasion on his head that they determine was made while he was still alive. So they start looking around. Well, they know now that it's the same injury that poor Pat Barry had encountered. So they now know that it wasn't Harriet. They start trying to figure out what has happened. And generally, the men that were crossing back over this bridge, which was just this tree that had been felled, as they had fallen off this particular log, they'd hit themselves on a rock below. And that's what caused them to not regain consciousness and then drown. The current was so swift that it would twist them around and take their clothes, and after a few days of being twisted around and turned and in this eddy, they were completely naked. So that's how they determined all of it took place. And poor Harriet, Madam Harriet, or Old Harriet as everyone called her, was released then afterwards. Now, whether or not she went back into business, I don't know. I would venture to say that she probably did, but she was probably a lot more careful at that point.
Rattlesnake Dick had many other names. More than a few highwaymen claim to be him. His true identity was really never known. It's known that he came from Canada to try his hand out prospecting and was unjustly accused of stealing a mule. He embarked on a life of crime, stating, "Since I have the name, hell, I might as well have the game too."
Rattlesnake Dick, coming in from Canada as a young man, coming into the U.S. and migrating his way down to California, has the whole entire outlaw persona to him. By having that outlaw persona, meaning he's going out and he's garnering funds that he did not justly earn. I mean, he didn't work for them. He was never really caught. Rattlesnake Dick was out in our area and traveling all throughout Nevada County, Placer County, all around, and he was able to elude the lawmen. Rattlesnake Dick, like a lot of folks in the area, get their name from something that they're known for doing. And my understanding is Rattlesnake Dick received his name from working at Rattlesnake Bar, placer mining there at Rattlesnake Bar. I think Rattlesnake Dick was definitely very proud of who he was and his profession that he chose for himself. He wanted to be that outlaw. He mentioned how much he enjoyed that aspect of it, and he might as well be that guy.
He didn't start out to be an outlaw. He was a miner, but because something went missing and ended up in his tent, which he had nothing to do, and he was framed for it.
And then also, he was accused of stealing some horses. Fortunately for him, he was not the thief of the horses at that time, and later he was also accused of stealing some mules. He did not steal the mules, however, he did end up going to prison for those mules, and a few years later he was released from prison.
Then he was a marked man, and no one would let him alone. They all thought that he was this criminal, and he couldn't live a life of the law-abiding citizen. So he said, you know, if I can't live this life as a law-abiding citizen, I'm going to do what everybody thinks that I have done, and I'm going to embark on a life of crime.
We think we have it rough today. We look back at what the gold rush era had, you know, the outlaws, the lawlessness. There was no law. People were stealing from them. You had, you know, stories that we hear of Wells Fargo taking from Black Bart to his gold mining area or his gold panning area, redirecting water. Well, you stole from me, so I'm going to steal back from you, almost an eye for an eye type attitude. And really that's where I think a lot of the lawlessness came from during that period of time of the gold rush, is that whole outlaw atmosphere. Rattlesnake Dick was that outlaw, and during an outlaw time, he had some backing from possibly some of his friends to really help him out, to help him, you know, kind of strategically place himself to where he could always outrun the folks coming after him, the law at that time. And when I say law, you know, for me it seems somewhat loose, right? Making up on the fly. Whatever that person who held that badge felt, whatever they felt to make happen.
That certainly wasn't what he wanted to do. He tried endlessly to get people to believe that he was not a criminal, that he was a good guy, but no one would believe him, and he finally succumbed to the dangers of being a criminal. He would often taunt the law enforcement agents in the area by placing advertisements in the newspaper saying, you can't catch me.
A lot of these guys, it sounds like with Jesse James and others, they were working with the media so that they could really tell their story or you know, get people behind them. Again, going back to Black Bart and Wells Fargo, a lot of folks were kind of against that aspect of the big corporation trying to take over. One of the stories that I've heard, the money that Rattlesnake Dick had stolen, the $80,000 at that time, was stolen from Empire Mine. During that period, not really exactly sure how the dollars got divvied up, but the $40,000 that was buried, his clan that helped him with that theft, or helped him move that money, they didn't realize that there was that much money. They only knew about half of the money. They didn't realize the other half, the other $40,000 that he had buried. Like any good story, there's a lot of variations within that good story. Some of the variations for Rattlesnake Dick, that he had folks running with him and helping him conspire. Other folks that you know, say that he acted alone, or even after the fact that he was hung and you know, taken away somehow.
He wrestled with his morals quite a bit. So I think indeed he did kill himself. I think he shot himself, and I think he shot himself in a place nobody would ever be able to find him. And so I think he wanted to perpetuate his legend.
But then other folks talking about how he was able to escape and go on and live his life however he chose to live. So like with any good story, it's just a mysterious end. The best part to the end of the Rattlesnake Dick story is the fact that you know, there is still gold out there. When he and his accomplices had taken the gold of $80,000 at that time, which is my understanding upwards of $4 million today, that you know, they got away with half of that gold. Half was you know, seized. The other half is buried somewhere. the base of the mountains. So a lot of folks have been out here up and down the Sierras looking for that gold for many years. There's a few $1 million out there for some lucky soul.
In 1896, Nevada County Sheriff David Douglas was on the trail of highwayman C. Myers. He tracked the suspect to a wooded location just above Nevada City, California. The sheriff was subsequently killed by an accomplice of the man who was hidden in the forest. It remained a mystery until a confession 61 years later.
David Douglas was a sheriff of Nevada County in the late 1800s. He was elected at a young age in his 30s. He began investigating in 1896 reports of highway robbery.
I think Sheriff Douglas was a real credit to this community because he knew that there were people out there committing robberies using a firearm, and he chose to go out and attempt to capture the people who were committing these crimes. He went by himself. He had deputies with the department, but the sheriff went and shows his initiative in trying to just keep his community safe, because he was truly a member of the community. He was a native Californian and had been elected as the new sheriff, and he was following up on a number of robberies that had occurred north of Nevada City.
Someone was robbing coaches and getting somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 to maybe $60 per robbery, which in today's dollars, it's like a month's wages back then. So, I mean, it was a decent amount of money, but it wasn't anything incredibly significant. But nonetheless, it became pretty prevalent, and there was a large effort made to try and track down the person responsible.
So the robberies didn't end. They kept going, and the sheriff knew he had to do something about finding the people responsible for these robberies.
So getting some information and doing a lot of checking around and telling people to keep their eyes open for a potential suspect, Sheriff Douglas made his way out to Sugarloaf Mountain.
As he tied up the horse, followed the footprints, and here was a large opening in the brush. As he went through there, a man is standing there with a rifle and started to make the move towards the sheriff in a threatening manner. So the sheriff drew his .44 and promptly shot the man several times. But the sheriff was also shot and killed. The deputy sheriffs looked for the sheriff and found him the next day with Mr. C. Myers, who had been an employee at one of the mines in the local area, and the sheriff, who was married, had a child, had other family members here in the area, was also found dead. They theorized that another person was involved because somebody had gone through the pockets of both of these men. And the coat of Mr. C. Myers had been folded and put underneath his head. So they felt there was another person involved. A young man in his early teens was questioned by authorities down in Marysville, and there was just not enough to hold the young man. So they let him go. The sheriff was buried and is in the Nevada City Cemetery. This case was cold, had been cold for a long time, until an attorney in 1961 contacted then Sheriff Wayne Brown and said, "I have a man who has a story to tell you." And it was apparently the ex-son-in-law who had become a little disgruntled at his father-in-law and passed on a story about the father-in-law having been involved in a shooting here in Nevada City many years prior. Through the investigation, they determined it was probably the man who had actually shot the sheriff rather than Mr. C. Myers. But there was just not enough evidence. There was not enough to bring this man to trial, but they really considered the case closed because of what they had seen. This has been a very interesting case, and I got involved in this as a very young deputy sheriff and driving around the Nevada City area. And I found the marker by the Nevada City airport that indicates where this shooting occurred. And that marker is still there to this day. The young man that was involved in this, obviously scared to death because he's a teenager and been involved in a shooting. Well, after he's interviewed by the officials in Marysville, he just kind of disappears for a while. Well, his son-in-law in the 60s, when he's telling Sheriff Wayne Brown and the district attorney about what has actually happened, related that the man had moved away, had actually married, had children, and became an insurance agent. That he took his life and what happened and turned it around and kept that secret with him for 60 years before it was actually given to the authorities. The sheriff was the chief law enforcement officer of the community, and he did everything he could to keep the community in line. But times were hard. People didn't have the money, and so what's the easiest way to get some money? Take it from someone else. It's still the situation that goes on today.
100 years ago, stepping into a thicket and potentially being shot by a Winchester rifle could happen today, and is unfortunately probably more prevalent today. And so our officers are always walking this fine line of public perception, transparency with the public, use of force, getting our suspect and keeping the community safe, and also having that really strong relationship with the community so that we can get those leads and get the information, which is sort of what happened, 60 years after Sheriff Douglas's death. Somebody came forward and contacted the sheriff's office because they felt that they could, and that's what we hope is the environment that we're fostering when we're working with the community.
The situation here in Nevada County is changed greatly, but it also hasn't. There's still very rural areas of this community that the current deputy sheriffs go out on, and their closest assistants may be 30, 40 minutes away. So they're actually out there by themselves. So the law enforcement officers back then and now use the best weapon that they have, their mouth. They talk to people because they didn't have the help in the area that other agencies have now. So being a good talker actually saved officers' lives. That has not changed in 150 years.
What motivates us? Necessity or greed? You see, accepted history is often judged and written by the heroes, not by the villains. Maybe deciding for ourselves what is right, what choices can be made, and what serves the common good is the best use of our stories.
I know that Harry Morris was good, but he gave up too soon. Too busy, I guess. I know that Black Bart's still out here somewhere, and I'm gonna get him.
I'm working still. Okay. Yeah, about an hour. 1% or 2. Okay. Love you too. Bye. Off to SPD on the way home. How do those kids drink a gallon a day?